It ended up giving us some of our best test results because we could repurpose that same language, write a copy on a landing page, and we saw double the conversion rate from just that copy change.
Hello, and welcome to another episode of What's Working in E-Commerce. I'm your host, Eagan Heath. I'm a partner at Asymmetric Marketing. We help direct-to-consumer e-commerce businesses with all kinds of things. We do WordPress, WooCommerce sites, on-site SEO, paid search, paid social, email automation, and Amazon. Today, we are talking about CRO conversion rate optimization with an expert, AJ Davis. She is the founder and CEO at Experiment Zone. AJ, welcome.
Hey, thanks for having me on.
Right on. AJ, I'm so excited to talk CRO. I just love this. I always tell people, I wish we were a CRO agency. We're already doing plenty, so it's I got to leave it to you. I got to leave it to the pros here. What got you into CRO?
I stumbled into it a little bit by accident, but maybe that's how we all end up where we are. I was a user experience researcher, so UXR at Google, and worked on the product from like sketching on a whiteboard to product launch for Google Optimize. So I was in charge of interviewing a whole bunch of people who do CRO day in and day out. And I was meant to really just be there and listen in and capture insights and learnings for the development and design teams. But what I found was I was feeling like this was the missing piece. With research, you often find the problems, figure out what people need and how to design things, but you don't always know if it works. And CRO is that missing piece where you can then go test it in the real world and see if all your hypotheses really worked out. So I absolutely love what I do. And I was having seen it on the other side and then getting to live it, it's held up to what I wanted it to be.
Oh, awesome. And rest in peace on Google Optimize. We don't get to have it anymore. Is that right?
All gone. Yep.
How sad.
Yep.
What a great tool that was, and unbelievable that it was free, and how cool that you were there at the creation of it or as Google was working on it. Mm-hmm. There's so many questions for you. I got to choose one here so we can sequence it. I wonder if you could just talk about that process. What was that like internally at Google? What were the conversations like? And just paint a picture for us, or maybe tell us a story from that time. I'd love to know from the inside.
Yeah. There's a lot of things I can't specifically talk about, but I would say one of the things that was notable about the departure of me leaving Google at the time was that I got a lot of side eyes because it's a place with a ton of resources, some really smart people working on really good problems. And I was just missing something. And I think for me, I had worked at agencies before. I worked at a UX consultancy and I worked doing some government R&D, and I'm just used to juggling lots of ideas and seeing them come together. You know, you can learn from seeing different clients in different industries and different inspiration that way. So I got a lot of side eyes of, isn't this a great place to work? Why would you go get out there on your own and take the risk of the venture on your own?
Yeah, I'm so glad you did. And I'm guessing you are too.
Yeah, it's been a wild ride. We're 7.5 years into this. So every time I say how long it's been, it surprises me because it feels like it's gone really fast.
Yeah, I know what you mean. I was also in corporate. I was at Epic, which is like hospital IT software. And I was there for 5 years. And when I was like, I'm starting an SEO agency. They're like, what is that? And what are you doing? And why? There's corporate people and then there's entrepreneurs. And I think each to their own, right? So that's great. I'm looking at your LinkedIn too. I'm just totally distracted by this. So you did some human-computer interaction at Tufts University. Can I ask about that?
Yeah. My whole career started in the financial services industry. I had studied economics, but the thing that really drew me in economics was behavioral economics. And I was missing that piece in that part of the corporate world of what is it about our human needs and behaviors that makes us a little bit unpredictable, and how can we learn and observe that? So I kept finding myself drawn into projects where we could define how something looked, define how something worked. And I didn't have a word for what that was. And I ended up just taking some classes while I was working there, talking to 100 people over coffee and stumbling my way into the UX world. And the way that Tufts program worked, it was like I took one class a semester, and then I ended up jumping ship and going to Bentley for the full-time program a couple of years later.
Very cool. And user-computer interaction, or how did you guys think about that? I'm thinking back to when I was at Epic, when they started to do some user testing or bring in UX people, which was actually late in the game, but also it's a B2B thing, or at hospitals. So it was functionality first, enterprise software, and then, all right, let's think about the UX piece. I'd be going to the cafeteria, and they'd have these special computers, and they would scan your eyeballs, and it would watch where are you looking on the screen as you're using things? Is that the sort of thing you were looking at, or that you've ever worked with?
I have my graduate thesis. It's been a while to talk about this, but my graduate work was actually at the intersection of how do we use eye tracking, a technology called galvanic skin response, which detects when someone has some sort of emotional response.
Wow.
And then we use the Microsoft product reaction cards to pinpoint like a meaning to an elevated emotion and to the thing that triggered it. So some visual stimuli that triggered that. I thought that's what people did in the real world. And then it turns out just asking questions of users and watching behavior, even with all that fancy tech layered on top, was something most companies weren't doing. So that has become my mission, to bring these kind of easy entry point qualitative measures and approaches into roles and places where people care about quantitative, and say, hey, we can get even better results by really knowing the foundational problems in the way of our customer and then measuring it in the real world through an A/B test. So yes, I've done a ton of eye tracking stuff, but in the real world, I haven't needed it as much as just sitting down and talking to people and observing them.
Yeah, this is utterly fascinating. Usually I'm jumping right in. What's a good landing page look like? What should this go? But I cannot let this thread go. This is fascinating. Am I understanding in your answer then that you thought one was better or useful enough compared to the other in terms of self-reported, what does a user say, versus those other sorts of biometrics is the word of where's the eyes, what physically are they doing, or how are they responding? Is one better than the other or more useful, or how do you think about that?
I think the first thing is cost. So one is much more expensive than the other. It's much cheaper to talk to 5 or 6 people than it is to get a large enough sample to really pinpoint with meaning what the eye tracking data is telling you. And the technology is super expensive. So just the scale of the study has to be different, and the amount of data you need and the amount of technology you need. And I think the hypothesis we were operating in, we were graduate students, we were all studying how people do this research, was that everyone was doing the research to start with, and now we needed to advance the field. But in practice, going into industry, I noticed that most companies are just scratching the surface, and the opportunity was to take them from 0 to 1 instead of from 4 to 5. So it was really more of, these are building blocks to get to the place where you need eye tracking and some of these more sophisticated technologies. And if you're not doing the basic stuff, you got to start there first, because there's a ton of value you can extrapolate at that point.
Yeah. I'm so tempted to stay in academia land, but I guess we got to get into practice here. When a client comes to you and you're just getting started, what's your process? What is that step by step? What's the first thing? How do you go through conversion rate optimization for your clients?
Yeah, the first thing we do is we take what we've seen be the kind of the low-hanging fruit or the more obvious things that you can fix. So if someone can't click from one spot to the other, or they can't see some very fundamental data, we'll point those out and just do a set of fixes. So we'll do an audit up front to identify some hypothesis areas of, these are some things we think we should be pretty certain are problems, but here's how we might want to test solving those. Then I like the analogy of some swings at the bat. So we take some swings at the bat at those ideas to see, are we on the right track? Do we have a good hypothesis for what the problems are? And then over time, either we're learning from the test and building and growing from that knowledge source, or we're starting to weave in more qualitative work as well. So we have some clients where we'll then do a usability study, maybe month 3 or 4, or some surveys. It all depends on what it is that we think is a sticking point that we don't have enough information about to really see that lift in conversion that we would expect to see based on the kind of change we're making. So it all comes together based on what we're seeing and what's working and what's not.
Yeah, thank you for talking about that. I like to ask also, we're doing applied science here is what I'm gathering. Mm-hmm. You've really got training in this. You're going from, I don't know if you'd say academic approach to a very business consulting practical approach here. Do you list out those hypotheses? And sometimes I've seen we rate maybe 0 through 10. How certain are we on it? How much of a difference it could make? And even how hard is it to do? And then you're prioritizing that way. How do you prioritize which hypothesis to test?
This is something we ourselves have iterated on over the years. So I've had some really robust spreadsheets with lots of scoring to bubble up the top things. We do still score, and we do still evaluate how visible is this change? How much do we expect this to move the needle based on past experiences? How hard is this to do? But really what we found is a layer that's more important is what are the problems that are most critical to the business and which hypotheses coordinate to that. So it could be that a test of red button versus blue button is easy, it's visible, and it might have an impact. But it might be even more important to say, should we have 2 levels of subscription or 1 level of subscription? And like these very fundamental business questions of how do we structure our product might be more important to sort out before we refine all the pieces in the UX. So what we come down to is, what is the company's goal or goals? What are the problems and ranked problems that are most critical? And that's where that qualitative can really be helpful to rank what's the most urgent problem. And then the hypotheses get scored, but they also get scored based on those problem urgencies.
Gotcha. That seems like a great approach. I'm curious, is it ever tricky to, again, as we're doing this applied science, is it ever tricky to say, how are we going to measure this? Obviously, we want the conversion rate to go up, but how do we know that our hypothesis and the change we made is the reason it went? I know there's statistical significance and A/B testing and things like that, but I don't know if I'm saying that correctly. But sometimes I've made that spreadsheet with clients. We're working on even just like a lead magnet page or something we're driving paid traffic to. And we've got our hypotheses, we've got like how we're going to measure it. But sometimes it's a little tricky to say, how do we know that we're correctly measuring this hypothesis? Does that make sense? How do we tie the metrics to the hypothesis?
Yeah. And yes, that is definitely something that's critical. And one of the things that we've noticed is we first plan for it. So we're really process oriented. We create a big plan of all the things we're going to measure before we jump into the test. So we have a sense of what we think should matter. So we're changing something on the product images, on the product page. It's probably going to change how people interact with that carousel. And it will probably change whether they add to cart or not. And that might be the set of like test metrics, the things closest to the change that we might see move. But we also care, did they order or not? And it's possible that by making that bigger or smaller, there's some element like email sign up that could be impacted. And so we try to brainstorm all the ways that the customer might move across the site and then all the pieces around the change and measure all of that. So one of the things that we find maybe other CRO agencies do differently, or the tools do by default differently than us, is they'll just pick one metric and they'll say win or loss. You're not going to learn as much from that. And in fact, the most interesting tests are when the metrics move in all different directions than you expect, but you have confidence in them. And then you have to start to extrapolate meaning. And often that's where we'll jump in with a usability study to really understand, why did this go so differently than expected?
Yeah, that's great. And I think even just to maybe we could make a concrete example or talk through one is, did people opt in for the email list? Did we add to cart? Did we check out? Once they checked out and bought, did they repeat purchase? Were there repeat purchases? Was customer lifetime value high? There's quite a few different pieces. It seems obvious. Why not just optimize for purchase? But actually, there's a couple different steps in there. And ultimately, lifetime customer value is even more important than that initial revenue. So is that the sort of challenge that you run into of what is the win?
Yeah, sometimes. I think we often come down to revenue per visitor as a pretty good proxy for a lot of these things coming together. So we'll also track that. But of course, that can be a bit noisy when you have some purchases that are outliers and you have to adjust what counts and what doesn't for the test. So we're maybe of the philosophy that we want to bring together as much data as possible, to use this like a nerdy term, to triangulate the data together so that we can really say, this is pointing us in the right direction. All these data points are supporting this. And if it's really noisy and it's conflicted, then maybe we shouldn't trust that there's a clear answer. And instead we should work towards understanding what's fuzzy in this. Maybe the solution we pitched wasn't the right one, but the problem still exists. And then we iterate from there instead of from a place of finality of this did it or not.
And that revenue per visit, then, if I've got that, is that the metric that's often
it's
the
one
North
of
Star?
one of several, but yeah, because you have to think about, did we get more people to order? And did we also get people to spend more? Because sometimes we'll get a whole bunch of people ordering, but spending a lot less. And maybe that's good or bad for the business, depending on lifetime revenue. Do they come back? What's the life cycle look like? So there's lots of informed conversation at each of those stages that help us understand that.
Thank you. Yeah. I'm thinking of sometimes when we'll do an A/B test, and it might even be on ad click-through rate or something like that, or it could be, did this page convert? We're pulling up Neil Patel's calculator. How many visits, how many conversions? We're trying to get to 95% certainty on statistical significance, right? That's pretty good. That's better than many people know to do. But I'm realizing that when you've got that revenue number in there too, it's not just true, false, did it convert, yes, no. There's this other variable too. And so I'm curious, are you using tools that can track all that and tell you if the revenue per visitor was statistically significant and better? Or are you plugging that into your own calculators? How do you calculate that then?
We do have our own proprietary calculators that we use to analyze all the data. So we'll do monitoring of the tests, and then we'll do a full analysis after each test. And within each of those stages, there's a deeper dive into the data. So once a test is over, we'll dive into all the segments and all those other metrics that might be impacted. I think the kind of magic in what we do is translating a ton of data into a couple of executive slides, because I think that's where what this conversation we're having is a challenge a lot of people have when they see that full spreadsheet. They're like, wow, there's a lot of data here. What does it mean? What should I focus on? Oh, this one data point looks different than these other ones. And I think a really important thing is to be able to frame it as, here's the change in the person that was visiting the site. Here's what behaviors, they were more likely to click on the button, is much more understandable than, for this particular segment, we saw a 2% shift in likelihood to do and this and this and this. So for us, it's we zoom really deep into we like to say we go layers deep so that our clients don't have to. So we dive really deep into lots of data and then pull out the pieces that really matter.
Yeah. When you say it back in plain language, do you get caught up in more people converted and it was statistically significant, or do you just leave that last part off and you just won't tell them more people converted unless it was significant?
Yeah, we basically have some thresholds of statistical significance where we report it or not, and we'll report it with uncertainty, with this is reduced certainty, and then if it's over 95%, we'll just say this is the fact, as long as we had the full sample we needed.
It did more. Okay, yeah. I think that in itself is such a valuable modern day skill of dig through the data, find the insights, but then come back down from the mountain, communicate them to the people of, here's what we found, here's what it means, here's what we do.
I think that's really probably the primary thing I brought from UX research, because in the qualitative world, you're recording 40 hours of interviews and then reading out in 20 minutes for the rest of the team what you learned. So I think that's just something that I didn't realize how that is a skill I've built. I thought it was just a natural thing we could all do, and how hard it really is to take a mountain of data and turn it into, here's 3 bullet points of what you learned, the quick elevator pitch of the takeaway.
Yeah. And that's a great thing to build a business on. Difficult for other people, easier for you. That's great. I want to jump in and see some of these, but I think it sounds like even before we're setting up A/B tests, there's steps in there, or you're talking about this user research. Is it user testing? Is it user interviews? Can you just describe that process of how are you getting that feedback from potential customers?
Yeah. And this is where it's such a consulting answer. It depends, right? So it really depends on the customer, how easy it is to get to someone who's a good representative customer. So if we were working with someone maybe who's maybe sold shoes, children's shoes, that might be a much easier kind of representative sample to find people. Maybe it's mostly moms who buy shoes for their kids, and to find people that represent them in the tools that are out there, like usertesting.com. We have worked with clients where their audience is so specific and so narrow that we really have to work with either their specific customers or subject matter experts that represent those insights. So one of my favorite examples is we worked with an IT software company where it was a specialized role within the IT team that we needed to talk to. And instead of talking to those folks, we ended up talking to the sales team, and not the sales leadership, but the sales frontline, the people actually talking to these people every day and having them act out or relive some of the conversations and questions they got. And we ended up we had 15 interviews, and we built up a really good body of the specific words and terminology and questions and things that they got that we probably could have gotten even better by talking to them, but it would have taken us months to recruit those particular people. And it ended up giving us some of our best test results, because we could repurpose that same language, write a copy on a landing page, and we saw double the conversion rate from just that copy change. So sometimes it depends, right? We're not trying to do perfect academic research. We're trying to get the best proxy at things that we think will help the business grow.
Can you give an example of what that process is? Do they come into a lab somewhere and they're stepping through on a particular device? Can they use their own device at home and report back? What's the format of those user tests and interviews?
We're mostly doing remote studies at this point. I think COVID has pushed us all to be remote and at home more than before. And so it's same for participants. Back in my pre-consulting days, I did many lab studies, and there are certainly advantages and disadvantages to being in person. You get some more body language when you're in person than when you're on Zoom, but you now are narrowing who can come in to someone who's available during the day and available to drive there and has the time and freedom to do that. So you can gain and lose things with different settings. And I think for most businesses, the gains from remote, like the quickness to get the results, the range of participants you can get is worth the benefit or the potential loss from the other lab studies.
Yeah. And I may have missed this. Are you showing them landing pages and having them react, or you're doing more research, asking them questions and just learning about their views on things?
Totally depends on the research project. Yep. So when I use the term usability study, typically we're having them go through and use the website on their own. We do the sales team representatives were interviews. So we talked to them and asked questions that were open-ended. We've done surveys as well. So it's really contextual. We've done prototype testing where we have a potential site we would use, and that needs a little bit more guidance. So it all comes down to what is the research question we're trying to learn, and then we match the method to that research question.
Okay. I hope people are getting a feel for this of there's much more to CRO than A/B testing. Is that right? There's so much to this. I'm even thinking of all these years. This is my 9th year doing search engine optimization, SEO, and the sort of feeling of we want to hire you and you're going to do SEO for us. And there's a whole blog post about that of just there's no such thing as someone doing SEO for you. It is integrated with so many parts of the business of who are you speaking to? What do they care about? What do we need to educate them about? What are our goals with this? And it's pretty soon you're touching everything else. You can't really tease it apart. And just from what we've said already, AJ, what you're teaching us about, it could be the offer. It could be the pricing. It could be the colors on the page or the layout. There's so many different pieces here, some of which are design related, some of which are human psychology related, some which could be technical. Like there's just so many parts of your brain getting tickled here that are required to do this. It's very interesting. So I don't have a question related to that, but maybe you can just react to that.
Yeah, it is something we get asked, like, how much time does this take? It's like a check. We checked conversion. Now our site converts.
We did CRO, yeah.
Yeah, and there's a little bit of that, right? There's a little bit of the audit process where you'll have fixes that come into play, or a usability study might give you a set of things that all go in at once. But I think the best partners understand, and what we bring to the table is that we're building up a body of knowledge that then feeds all these other parts of your business. So not only does the sales team help us, we help the sales team, and all the product team gets feedback from us too, and we learn what's coming on the market from them. Our SEO partners tell us what copy is working and what has changed, and then we can start to integrate that into some of the other pages. So it's like it's a full ecosystem, and I think for people who are really thinking about doing it right, they understand that the value builds up over time. It's not just like a check, we've done SEO or CRO.
Yeah, it's cumulative. That's very interesting. And is there really just such a liberal arts approach required here of design sensibility, copywriting, and then checking the statistics? Am I thinking the right way? This is left brain and right brain?
Yeah. I feel like someone mentioned that to me a long time ago. I haven't thought about it that way in a while, but it absolutely is. I think you can't just look at the data. You have to figure out what the meaning is from that. And then you have to think about what's the psychology that ties to that and what design elements would respond to that psychological need. So yeah, you find a lot of people in CRO come from kind of unusual paths because we have skills that start to overlap by these different experiences we've had.
Yeah, very interesting. I want to get to the case studies, but maybe I should just ask the outset, AJ, are there best practices? Do you have a checklist you go in and say, let's try this? Or does it need to be a custom approach for every client?
We take almost like a UX research approach. So our conversion audit is not asking the question, is your nav sticky or not? Is your button like red or blue, right? It's not a specific yes, no type audit. We certainly have some best practices for those and point those out. But what we really try to get to is just like we talked about with the usability study, we try to put on the hat of your customer. What is it your customer is trying to do? What are they trying to buy? What do they care about? And then we go through the experience as that customer and figure out what stands out to us as representative users. So that's the approach we take. Is an expert review is the method from UX research, is we know a little bit about it where we can extrapolate some good examples and meanings of what customers might struggle with, but then we want to layer in the real customer voice later once we've exhausted the things that we already saw initially.
Love it. Yeah. Do you want to pull up a case study or some examples here? I feel like people are watching this. They're just like, show us a landing page. We need a visual. If we're watching on YouTube, would love to hear about some work you've done and maybe even just see something visually to get a sense of what was the outcome here, AJ.
Yeah. And are you seeing all the tabs if I click?
Yep. Yeah.
Okay,
so we're
perfect.
on your website, experimentzone.com.
We're on our website. We've got a bunch of case studies on our work page here. I wanted to share a couple of easier wins we had where the change is pretty small and then get to some of the more complicated moments. So because people are more visual, I'm just going to show the change that we made. So with this golf brand, they had this big block at the top. It was probably an SEO partner who said, hey, let's have this block. And then we had all this text that linked below. And then on desktop, that text was over to the left side. You could see that big block here, product images. So on mobile, the product images are below this and this down here. So it's very far down the page. And so on desktop, we just removed that block of text. We didn't actually remove it. It's still there. They could click on this information, open up to learn more. And on mobile, same thing. That text was still on the page, but it was just collapsed under an information icon. And so just moving the functionality to being collapsible or not led to a 31% increase in orders among people who visited this page. So visitors were more likely to see a product page and more likely to stick all the way through the end of the journey just by bringing up products higher on the page and reducing the amount of text at the very top. We found new visitors were more influenced by this, and that surprised us because part of why this client had this text was SEO, but also they thought it was helpful to educate. Here's why you might want squirts, that they have good reviews, they had all this information embedded here. And we were surprised, or they were surprised to find out that even for new visitors, they didn't need that education content, that they were better, more engaged, more likely to learn by having the information just as part of the products.
Picture told 1,000 words here.
Yeah. Yeah. And this is one of those kind of low-hanging things. This is an early on test with them. So it didn't have a specific study pointing to this. This is an example of intuitively, it just felt as we were looking at this, probably as anyone following along, that there's a lot of scrolling to have to do to be able to get to product. And a principle that I would just share with your audience is that the higher up the product is on the page, the better we found it performs in general.
Yeah. Are there other things like that? Social proof, reviews, as seen on? Are there things that we should try to get above the scroll?
I think it's page dependent. Actually, the other case study I thought would be helpful is this comparison of what information this client had above the fold. So let me show it on desktop. It's a little easier to compare because this is a B2B case, but this was the same information. We just reordered it to include some solutions to grow your business. So it was anchoring to the benefits that the other company would get or the lead would get before diving into the specific products. So this is a more us-centric approach, and this is more of an audience-specific approach.
Yeah. Can I call something out here? For people listening or watching this, I'm looking at what's the headline on the page, and as I see it here, desktop, the control was invoke scale, and then the variant was benefit to them, right? Manage, backup, secure your customer environments. Crystal clear in normal language what this is going to do for you, not some marketing speak, right?
Yeah, I think there was a couple of elements on this page. Let me scroll down to the specific hypothesis. Oh, no, it's at the top. Moving all around. Yeah, and so I think this was an example where we were tagging a couple of things together, where it was more of a redesign, minimize some of the sections that maybe weren't as helpful to people. And so that first one that we showed you with the golf brand was one change, and that gives you crystal clear, this is the thing that moved the needle. And in a test like this, we rolled in multiple changes, moving in the same direction of clarity, customer-centric language, and then clear calls to action. Sometimes we'll do a big change like this, and it's not a full redesign. It's just rearranging and rewording some things, but it is a bigger swing test that we can't pinpoint just the headline or just the order of the page but this combination of things was really helpful.
Yeah, who cares? It's higher conversion rate now. We're starting from a higher one for our next test. What strikes me about this one is, in terms of a modern website, the design was pretty slick. Like they've got brand colors. It looks like a modern website. As you just glance through, it's hard for the untrained eye to see the difference. It's almost like in the old newspaper, the two cartoons, like this one, the dog's in the background. This one's it's almost hard to see at a distance what's different here. And so I think it speaks volumes to how much messaging matters, how much those layout elements matter. Of the high level design, the branding did not change at all here. It really is these small elements, like small hinges swing big doors.
Right. And I think what I spoke to earlier with another client was we just took the words they already used as a brand in the sales process and put it high up on the page, like it was a hero test. And sometimes we just get caught up in trying to perfect or mirror what other businesses are doing, and we lose track of what it is the customer really needs. And that's where that marriage of qualitative and quantitative data together really helps us bring this home, because we figure out what your customer needs by observing what your customer needs and how they talk about it, and then also validate that it's the right solution at the end of the day.
Love it. I'm now seeing you have a CRO calculator on your site. Do you want to talk us through that?
Sure. We've got a little calculator here. This is to help folks understand the value of investing in CRO. So say a company has 250,000 visitors and they're getting 5,000 orders every month. All of this on there's a conversion rate that pops up there. We calculate what your current revenue is. And this one is just factoring in conversion shifts. So we're not assuming any shifts in AOV, which would typically be something that might happen. But if we're just saying we want to change the baseline, from 250 per month, where 5,000 are converting, and we want to see a 15% increase in that, we can see what our conversion rate. That's a 15% increase in conversion rate. This is where your monthly orders look like. And then if you were to say, okay, we're going to do a total investment of, let's say, 10,000 a month, the number of months you're going to make the investment, we'll do it for a year. Sorry, that is the total investment divided by number of months. You can see what that works out to be and what your additional revenue can be. So it's just a way to simply present, wow, we can really grow revenue for a very small amount of money. And our ROI is huge in that scenario.
Do you talk through this with sales prospects and show them and say, okay, here's projected ROI? Because that's what everybody wants to know. And it's amazing to be able to show this like this.
Everything depends. It's very contextual to who it is. But yeah, we like to talk about easily, we look to get a 10% growth in conversion in a given contract, and we're looking for 10x or higher ROI. And we have yet to see a client below that. 117 would be extraordinary, but I think for many of our clients with 15 to 20 ROI, return on ROI for the program. And that's just return on for a single year. And then a lot of the changes will just have in ongoing return as those sites continue to live on and benefit them beyond that first year.
Love it. Love it. And it looks like you have a podcast as well. Is that right?
We do have a podcast. Yes. The Experiment Zone podcast. We do it a little differently. We talk with store owners about their specific store, and we do a live audit. So we do a 20-minute audit looking at their website. So just like you're looking at our case studies, we take a look and we would pull up their store and walk through it together and give some tips as we walk through and talk about some of their contexts and challenges as well. It's great for e-com owners or CMOs. So feel free to check that out at experimentzone.com or experimentzonepodcast.com.
Very cool. Love it. It looks like that's on YouTube as well. Is that right?
It's on all the things. Yep. You can find it anywhere.
Oh, cool. Love it. Anything else you want to share or show us today, AJ?
I think the last thing I wanted to share is an example where we took a test and then found value from research. So this one I'll keep high level, but if you wanted to read through this case study, this is one where we did something that we thought was pretty straightforward. We thought, hey, if we tell customers why this business is good at what they do, and we told them on different parts of the site that the same information from the homepage would work on the product page. And we've seen that work time and time again. And we ran the test, we got the full sample, and we didn't see any significant shift, which really surprised us because we thought lots of people land on the product page, they'll never see that piece of content on the homepage. Surely telling them why we're different and better than competitors is what we need to do here. And rather than say, I guess it didn't work, or maybe they didn't need the information, we dug in deeper and ran a usability study. So we showed them the value proposition, got their feedback on it, and talked about it in the context of the overall journey of the site. And the response was something like, this doesn't help me see them differently. Like the actual value propositions were the problem, not the placement or that they didn't know about them or didn't see them. So while we found they all saw it and they got that so what response to it, we ultimately were able to work with the company and iterate and find better ways to position what they do. And then that led to, in the next test, same test, different value propositions, an increase in conversion to free trials.
That's excellent. I'm just going to call out in my language what you said, because it's very important. I want to make sure everybody's got it. I want to make sure I have it too. We maybe suspected it was a page layout sort of thing or emphasis in the copywriting, right? But we discovered through the research that just the USPs that we were flexing about, they weren't impressed.
Yeah, it didn't mean anything. It didn't help convince them that they should sign up for and convert. And without the combination of the test where we saw no change, like we were not able to move the needle like we expected, and then get the validation in the user study that they saw it and the reaction was like, we don't care. That led to this broader examination for the company of how do we present ourselves? How do we talk about what's different? How do we really help customers understand why they should work with us? So obviously we're talking about the specific product page helping convert better, but I'd like to think that they also took that back and it reflected on it more generally as a business.
Excellent. Thank you for talking us through this. This is great stuff. I hope to have you back on, AJ, if you're open to it.
We'd love to. Yeah.
We always want the CRO updates, and this obviously goes even so far beyond CRO. I can see why it's valuable stuff, and I can see why it's complicated work. So extremely valuable. Just absolutely love it. Thank you for coming on. Where can people find you, and where can they follow what you're doing?
Yeah, they can find us on experimentzone.com. If you want to listen or join to our podcast, as I mentioned, it's experimentzonepodcast.com, or you can find us on YouTube or any of your favorite podcast channels. I have benefited hugely from people saying yes to me when I've asked them for coffee and advice. So I also love to extend that to your audience. So find me on LinkedIn, AJ Davis. There's a couple of us. So it's AJ Davis, ATX, or Experiment Zone will help you get there. And hit me up for a virtual coffee. I'd love to talk to people about what their challenges are, what they're working towards, and just help share knowledge about what we're all doing.
Yeah, very cool. And who's a good client for you? Do they need 250,000 visits a month? Do they need to be doing a certain revenue? Maybe talk about that, of who's a good fit to work with you.
Yeah, we typically set the threshold around 30,000 visits a month is a great time to be starting testing and really learning from all that traffic you're getting. The other type of audience or other type of client that works really well with us is if you're about to hit go on a lot of marketing spend, we're a really good partner to make sure that you're getting the highest value for each of those dollars. So any growth company that's saying, hey, we're investing in digital marketing, make sure you're thinking about our piece of the equation as well, because you want to make sure that all that effort you're doing to drive people through SEO and paid media results in business. And that's how we help.
Yeah, we're going to spend that money. Let's make sure we have the best chance possible to get the ROI. And just to touch on it, you're saying 10x ROI is pretty normal for when people are investing with you. Is that correct? Just if anybody wants to get 10x results, definitely talk with AJ Davis and her team. Really impressed. AJ, thank you for coming on and sharing what's working in e-commerce.
Thanks for having me on. I would love to be on another time. So thanks for leading a great conversation today. It was a lot of fun.
All right. Sounds good. Thank you.